Good morning. I want to focus this morning on two words, both of which begin with the letter C. Now, one of them, I wouldn't have to tell you, you've heard so many times, coronavirus or COVID-19. I'm looking forward to the day, as I know you are, when we don't have to hear that word again. But the second word is a biblical word. And it's important for us to think about in this pandemic and crisis, contentment. Can we have contentment in the midst of a coronavirus pandemic? I believe so, certainly even using those two words together is an odd couple. One of the reasons I believe so is because the Apostle Paul, writing to us in Philippians chapter 4, told us about being incredibly content even while he was locked in a below-ground, dungeon-like prison with none of the modern conveniences we are experiencing in our stay-at-home situation. Beginning in verse 11 of chapter 4, he wrote, "I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances." Would you say that phrase with me aloud, please, in your home? For I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Would you read that phrase out loud with me, please? I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. What a lot of people would give right now to be able to say, like the Apostle Paul, I have learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether with plenty or with little. I was reading not long ago an article called, "Are You a Sensation Seeker?" And the article was talking about how some people absolutely thrive on danger and adventure. They live for one sensation after another, one ecstatic high after another. And it gave a little test to see if you qualify as a sensation seeker. And one of the items on the test was, have you ever climbed a mountain? And another was, have you ever parachuted out of an airplane? Another has, have you ever been parasailing, or have you ever water skied? And there were probably 20 or 25 things like that on the test. And I took it, and I must say, I failed miserably. A pitiful thought descended on me. I must be a very boring man. I have never climbed a mountain. I have never bungee jumped. I never will. I have never parachuted out of an airplane. I definitely never will. I have never parasailed. I have never water skied. I don't even know how to swim. I am an incredibly boring man. And then it talked about how people actually pay money to jump out of a plane. I know people that I could not pay them any amount of money to even get on a plane. And there are some people jumping out of planes. People actually pay money to get in a hot air balloon. Not happening. My idea of a good time and contentment is dinner with my wife, a stimulating book, a good ball game, or loitering around an old used bookstore. I like sensations. I just don't have to climb a mountain or parachute out of a plane to get a lump in the throat. Nothing wrong with any of those things at all, because everybody's different. But the really contented people are the people who can handle any and every situation and be content. They have learned to savor the normal, routine things of life as well as the spine-tingling moments. And my friends, it is something we have to learn. We have to learn the secret of being content in any and every situation, because it's not natural. Contentment is not always natural. It's natural for us to always want something different. If we're young, we want to be older. If we're old, we want to be younger. If it's old, we want something new. If it's new, we want something older or more nostalgic. If we have $100, we want $200. If we get a $1,000 check from the government in the mail in the next 2 weeks, we want it to be $2,000 or $3,000. If we have an apartment, we want a condo. If we have a condo, we want a house. If we have a house, we want a bigger house or a newer house or a nicer house. Until a little later in life, when we want to scale down and go back and live in an apartment or a condo again. If we have a job, we dream of having a better job or a bigger job or a closer job with a bigger office and a better boss, or with better benefits, or with more challenges or bigger opportunities or nicer people to work for or more vacation time. If we're single, we dream of being married. If we're married, well, you can finish that sentence yourself. Now, none of this is unusual in any way. We were born discontented, and some of us stay that way forever. And that's not always bad. There's a certain amount of discontentment that can be good for the soul. It's not wrong about having dreams for the future, the hope of something better. Discontentment sometimes drives us forward and keeps us innovating and working and inventing and striving and creating. But there is a discontentment of the heart and the soul and the spirit that leads in a wrong direction. That kind of discontentment is fueled by envy, the ambition that we have to have what somebody else has. The desire to win at all costs, no matter what it takes, or who gets trampled in the process. The discontentment of a critical spirit that causes us to make negative or cutting or hurtful remarks about other people. The discontentment of a complaining spirit where we always are making excuses and blaming others for anything that goes wrong, and have a refusal to take personal responsibility. An inability to be thankful for what we already have. A discontentment that fuels outbursts of anger because our expectations were not met. The discontented person looks around and always says, I deserve something better than this. And because he is never happy and satisfied, he drags other people into the swamp with him. No wonder Benjamin Franklin once said, contentment makes poor men rich. Discontentment makes rich men poor. Discontentment is the cancer of the soul. It eats away our joy. It corrodes our happiness. It destroys our outlook on life. We cannot be happy because we will not be happy. We cannot be satisfied because we will not be satisfied. Now, how do we overcome that kind of cancerous spirit? How can we be contented even in this age of a coronavirus pandemic? Let me make a few quick suggestions. First of all, keep everything in proper perspective. If you'll make spiritual matters the number one priority in your life, you can always be content. Why? Because with God's help, you always can have control over your spiritual life. You don't have any control over what may happen to you in other realms of life. 3 weeks ago, no one could have imagined what we have seen happen in the last 3 weeks. And we had no control whatsoever over that. About 4 weeks ago, tornadoes ripped through my old hometown of Nashville, Tennessee, and especially just east of town near Cookeville, Tennessee. And the youth minister of the College Side Church of Christ in Cookeville went to bed that night with his wife and 2 children, and an hour after going to bed, a tornado tore through their home, completely destroyed their home, and one of their young children was killed. You don't have any control over a tornado. You don't have any control over the direction of a hurricane like Irma. We don't have any control over the coronavirus. There are certain things we cannot control. We may lose friends, we may lose family, we may lose influence, we may lose our job. Paul, who wrote these words that we're reading this morning, had lost his freedom, yet he was still content. And we can always be content if we're wise enough to put spiritual matters and eternal things first, because God and you can control those. Second quick suggestion: always compare your present experiences with your darker times rather than your better times. Let me give you a couple of quick illustrations of that. 2 people can drive the same car. One enjoys it immensely because he has been driving a lesser car all of his life. The other person is miserable because most of their life they've been accustomed to driving a Porsche. 2 people can eat the same meal. One can enjoy it immensely because it's much higher quality than his usual diet. The other person doesn't enjoy it at all because he dines regularly at Ruth Chris. You see, the problem with comparing your present circumstances to your best days is that you will never be content. My wife and I married in 1977. We had no money. And when I say no money, I mean no money. We literally thought, each of us thought the other had more money than we did. I think that probably happens a lot. And we literally had to take wedding gift money that people gave us in the receiving line to take a brief honeymoon. We had no money. We had no savings. Have you ever heard the phrase poorer than Job's turkey? We weren't just poorer than Job's turkey. We were poorer than his bologna, too. We moved to a little small town called Chapel Hill, Tennessee. There were only 1,000 people living in the town. I made total $150 a week preaching in that church. I was driving a used Ford Pinto. She was driving a used Chevrolet Vega, and I mean very used. We were living in a little framed 2-bedroom home where you could not run the air conditioner and the dryer at the same time. The church offered to sell us the house for $15,000 in 1980. That tells you a little something. Now, our standard of living has improved a great deal since then. But you know, there were some advantages to that. And some of my happiest and best memories are from those days when we had virtually nothing. You see, we can learn to enjoy life more if we compare our present state to our lesser days rather than the best of times. Here's a third quick suggestion for me to give you. Learn to rejoice even in sorrow. Paul said, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. David wrote, those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who sow in tears, they learn how to be content even in sorrow, will reap with songs of joy. What a blessed promise. We can find good in our bad. Did you hear me? We can find good in our bad. As the great verse Romans 8:28 tells us, read it aloud with me in your home, please. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Folks, our joy should not be determined by how joyful we can be on our joyful days. Any unbeliever can do that. Our joy should be determined by how joyful we can be on our saddest days, how joyful we can be in prison like the Apostle Paul, how joyful we can be in isolation as many are now. You see, it's not so much the height of our mountaintop moments, but the height of our valleys that determines our real joy and happiness. If we can learn, like the Apostle Paul, to be content even in times of trouble, we will have life mastered. One last thing before I close. Learn to enjoy the simple, routine things of life if you want to be content during the coronavirus. Some of us are having to learn this right now. Many people have to experience the spectacular in order to be entertained or in order to find satisfaction. Solomon wrote an entire book about this. He tried everything in the world in order to find satisfaction, and over again he said all is vanity, or everything is meaningless, until he came to the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Sadly, some people never understand the joy and the satisfaction that comes from devoting their life to a cause, that comes from devoting their life to a purpose beyond themselves. Over the last couple of weeks, I've heard a lot of people express great thankfulness for doctors and for nurses who are working around the clock right now trying to save lives. And I have that same appreciation, but you know what? I have that appreciation for them all the time. They're doing that all the time, not just during this crisis, because their life is committed to a cause and a purpose, and that's not just a paycheck, it's to save lives. Teachers and coaches training our children have a purpose and a meaning in life. Our Sunday school teachers here at church, teaching the Word of God, have an important purpose and cause. People who work in various ministries of our church, organizations like Lifeline, Family Center, and many, many others, know that real enjoyment and satisfaction in life comes to devoting your life to a cause, to a purpose. Pleasure and even adventure can be found in the ordinary if we only know how to look for it. About 2 years ago, Dr. Ed Guttery here in our church recommended to me a book, and he said, you should read it. It's a life-changing book, and I just put it off and put it off and put it off. And then about 2 or 3 weeks ago, one of our former members and Bill and Lita Love's son-in-law, John O'Connor, sent the book to me and said, this book has been life-changing to me. So I thought, you know, if both Ed and John, who I respect, says this, I should read this. So I'm in the middle right now of reading this book written by a doctor called Being Mortal. And it's a phenomenal book about mortality and what happens as we age and what we do with the aged and what we do in end-of-life decisions. We can learn valuable lessons from the seriously ill or even the terminally ill. As they look back on life, they know that the only thing that really matters is whether someone genuinely cares for them and unconditionally loves them. The simple, routine things of life. Not adventurous or sensational or spectacular, but does somebody genuinely care for me? Does somebody unconditionally love me? And as I was reading the book, I was thinking back when one of our terminally ill members said to me a few years ago that she had never enjoyed the company of friends more than she does now. That she had never enjoyed the flowers in her yard like she did then. The reading of the Bible was more meaningful and alive to her than ever before. My friends, we shouldn't have to wait until that point in life to recognize what's really important. And we don't have to. If we can learn to enjoy God's creation, our families, our friends, our church, our work, the normal routine things that make up our environment, we will be able to say with the Apostle Paul, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. I'll close by a story about a 6th grade teacher who was teaching her geography students about the 7 wonders of the world. And at the end of her lecture, she asked her students to list what they considered to be the present day 7 wonders of the world. And there were several things that were voted on: the Great Pyramids of Egypt, the Taj Mahal, the Grand Canyon, the Panama Canal, St. Peter's Basilica, certainly the Great Wall of China. But the teacher noticed that one student, a quiet little girl, but she was very studious and thoughtful, had not yet made any suggestion. And she asked her if she was having trouble with her list. And she said, well, a little. I couldn't make up my mind because there were so many possibilities. And the teacher said, well, tell us what you've got, and maybe we can help a little. And she said, well, I think the 7 wonders of the world are to touch, to taste, to see, to hear. And she hesitated another moment or so, and then she continued, to hope, to laugh, and to love. And the room became devastatingly silent because everybody realized her list of 7 was far better than any other list that anyone gave. It's far too easy for us to look at all the blessings of our 21st century world and miss many of them in a time like this and not remember we still have the ability to touch and taste and see and hear and hope and laugh and love. Because that's truly living. And that's how we can truly be content even in the coronavirus pandemic. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Father, help us to learn that same secret. We thank you for the ability you have given us to enjoy the simple things of life, life itself, breath itself, the ability to touch and see and hear and laugh and hope and love. Continue to bless us, Father, as we go through this pandemic together. In Jesus' name, amen.